So what I'm saying is that when you do history, you don't go to... First you look at the people's history that they recorded themselves.
Sure.
And then then what you do is, if you want to revise your theory, if you want to say actually, however these people have recorded their own history isn't correct, because we have other evidence that suggests, then you would revise
No, but we have to treat claims skeptically. Otherwise we fall for anything.
But we don't,
and it seems to me that this claim is not being treated as skeptically as it should be. The claim is that the prophet was illiterate.
You don't believe the prophet was illiterate?
I'm not saying I don't believe. Well, I'm saying I haven't seen sufficiently unbiased sources to verify that claim.
So you don't know.
So I don't accept it. I'm not saying it's false. It might be true, right? But I don't accept it as true.
So you basically you don't accept anything unless you've seen it yourself? What?
No, of course not. I accept it based off. I accept claims based on the proportion of the evidence for.
Do you have any evidence that says he wasn't illiterate?
No.
So why would you oppose him?
But because you don't accept things. You don't. Okay. I don't have any evidence that there are no aliens on Mars. But I don't accept. If someone here said there are aliens on Mars, I would not accept that claim, even though it might be true. Right. Even though, and I don't have any contrary evidence that it's false. Unless you can bring the evidence to the table, I'm not going to accept.
So if someone
claim.
makes a claim there's aliens on Mars, would you say there's not aliens on Mars?
No, I don't make that claim.
I say you don't believe it.
I say I don't accept the claim to be true.
You don't believe it. That's the same thing.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
fine.
Because you have no evidence.
But it's not the same as me saying it's false.
No, I agree. Okay. So what you're saying is this: so someone comes and claims there's aliens on Mars. You've got no authority to say there is no aliens on Mars unless you can prove there's no aliens on Mars.
Correct.
All you can say is I don't believe it. Yeah.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. So when the Muslim comes and says that we believe the Prophet Muhammad was illiterate due to what we have, you have to question why you don't believe that.
Yeah, because I told you why.
Why don't you believe that? Why don't you believe their testimony?
I told you already.
Why?
Because they're not unbiased sources.
No. But why? So what?
Because that's what you want in a history.
So this is what I'm saying to you.
But if you don't have
approach to history.
Exactly what you just explained to you. If you have a contrary to it, you're right. So if, for example, you have Islamic sources saying Muhammad was illiterate, and then you have pagan sources saying no, he was writing books. He was a poet. Yeah. We're not. Listen to me. What you're saying is someone's come with a claim that he was illiterate, and here's why we're saying he's illiterate. Now, do you understand what a belief is? Yeah. A belief is the acceptance of something to be true with or without evidence. Okay. This is what a belief is. All right. So we believe Muhammad ﷺ was illiterate, and the reason we believe it is this, and this.
Yeah.
You have to prove, even if it's biased, even if it's written by the people who wrote the history because they were there. Listen, they were there. Why are you rejecting that just because it goes against you?
No, it's not just because it goes against me. You can't accept any claim made by people just because they were there. Right? Okay. People lie, people make mistakes.
And people tell the truth.
Yes. Right. So you don't know a priori which one of those three is the case.
No, but the question...
Right?
Yeah,
so you want to try and assess which one of those is true. Is it
how do you do that?
How do you do that?
Yeah.
If you want to know whether a claim is true in history, you look for multiple sources.
Right.
And you look to see, are there clear biases on the sources? Right. And if there are clear biases on the sources, you raise your level of skepticism.
Right. So the question would be this: who would have access to the knowledge if Muhammad was illiterate or not? Who would have that access? Who would know that?
Well, the people around him.
Right. Would people in Persia know it?
I don't know. Depends what interactions they had.
Well, if they never met him, would they?
If they hadn't met him,
right.
They wouldn't know.
And would people in Rome know it? In Egypt? Right.
No, of course
so
not.
the people you would expect to tell you about how he was are the people around him.
Right, but they're also the people...
But what you're trying to say is they lied.
No, I'm not saying they lied. They could be mistaken. It could be a legend made up later. Right. I'm not saying the people around him lied.
Or they told the truth.
That's a possibility as well.
Right. Now, the question is...
Hang on. Let me address this point. There's no assessment that they necessarily lie. The people come to false beliefs by all kinds of manners.
Right.
It could be legends that developed over time. It could be mistakes. It could be exaggerations. It could be mistranslations. It could be an outright lie. Right? Or it could be the truth.
Right.
Okay? Now, if we only have the biased sources, the ones that you would expect to try and paint someone... Okay, because in history, if you have a claim from someone who's clearly biased, then you have to treat that claim with more skepticism than someone that doesn't have a clear
everyone's
bias.
biased though.
No. But as I said, sometimes the bias doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, if in the case of World War II, right, if both sides agreed to certain things,
Yeah, but you're not presenting.
okay.
No. Because you presented Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And the Allies believe this and the Axis believe this. Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're not doing the same with this. You're not bringing us an alternative
Oh
view.
yeah, true.
No. Okay.
Didn't nobody write
No, but
against
didn't
the
you
claim?
just tell me that writing wasn't very active in that period of time?
Right.
Okay. So
What would you
therefore,
expect
it's
to
very
see?
difficult. No, the problem is it's very difficult
Right.
to test this claim whether it's really true.
Right.
I'm not saying I've got lots of evidence that it's
Right,
false.
right.
I'm not saying that.
Right.
So you're saying, well, bring me some evidence that it's false.
No.
And I don't have any.
No.
But I'm saying is that it would be it's hard to assess whether the claim is really true.
Can I ask
Because
you-
as you said, there wasn't a lot of writing going
Phil,
on at
Phil,
this
can I
time,
ask you a quick
right?
question? Earlier when you were talking about, for example, aliens being on Mars or something like that, for
Yes.
example, and you said
I mean-
if someone made that claim, you wouldn't. But what I would say the difference between that and this claim is, for example, great claims like something so crazy.
Yeah.
Of course, you're not going to accept by someone just saying it.
Yeah.
But the prophet, when most people back then were illiterate, being illiterate, that's not a crazy claim. So what you
No, but
did
there
is
were-
you- so what
obviously
you did
some
is-
people were illiterate
so what
because
you
it got
did-
written
so
down,
what you did,
right?
for example, what you did, for example, is like,
Yeah.
if you tell me, if I didn't know this area and you said Edge Road's that way, that's not like a massive claim. That wouldn't
Yeah.
be a claim that would really
Agree, fine.
shake everything, right?
Of course.
But what he did,
Of course.
instead of doing that,
No, of course.
I feel
No,
like
but
it's
the
a little
claim
bit
is,
disingenuous,
look, let's get down to the bottom
it's
line
very
of
simple,
this.
it's very simple.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Then let me get to the bottom
It's a
line of
basic
this.
claim. It wasn't
No,
a big claim.
fine.
No, it's
But it's not, because what you're saying is that a literary masterpiece was written by an illiterate person.
There you go.
So that's not what
Right?
we're saying.
Is that not what you're saying?
No. We're not saying that at all. What we...
Sorry, Imran. All right. Sorry, hang on. Sorry.
Okay.
Can I just? Me and Imran were having this chat. What was the claim? Maybe I misunderstood the claim. Why don't you repeat the claim and we go from
I
there?
said that you said that Prophet Muhammad or a group of people wrote the Quran.
That's your claim.
That's how you
don't want to disclose.
And I said I didn't agree with that. And I said I was giving different reasons for that.
Right.
Now, amongst the reasons was that the Prophet was illiterate, and then we went into the question of history and how we do history. So, in talk about early sources, we have first century Qurans that contain the statement that this was if you were one who could write with your hand, then the people would not have believed. This is sort of a quote from the Quran itself. Right. And when the Quran was in its fruition, literally, there were handfuls of Muslims only. And I know that you said that people believe things blindly, but when the people who were coming to believe in this gentleman in a time when he was saying things against their culture, their belief systems, were people who were looking for reasons to sort of say this is a false person, don't believe in him. Partly because of sort of clan rivalries and everything else. There were people who said, we did this and that clan did this, and now they're saying they've got a prophet. Why can't we say the same? These were the sorts of thought processes going on. No one refuted the fact that he was illiterate or said to actually.
Well, hang on.
no,
You don't know that no one refuted that. That's a claim you've made.
You don't even
There
trust
could have been
us.
plenty of people refuting that, and they
You're
didn't get
arguing from
recorded.
silence. That's your
I'm saying you
argument.
can't.
It's an argument from silence.
I would say
It is.
Maybe I could finish my sentence.
Who did you get these sources from?
Yeah. It's saying you're making a claim that we can't really check, and so we don't know that it's true.
So I can.
Yeah.
There's a response to that.
Okay.
So I agree that if just because something isn't said doesn't prove it didn't happen. Unless you expect it to have been mentioned if it didn't
He's a
happen.
madman.
And what I mean by that is we have many recordings of what happened at the time of the Prophet that are what we would call embarrassing or
That's the kind of
negative
thing.
things.
Saying they put him a madman,
Don't necessarily
they put
serve a
him
purpose, but have been recorded anyway.
show you
So an example would be we have a recording of a manuscript of the Quran or a page of the Quran being eaten by a goat, for example. It has no real significance because the Quran was a memorized text. But it's recorded. So we have not a lot of unquoting sort of inverted commas banality recorded. And then we have extensive life stories of the Prophet, peace be upon him, what happened to him, also recorded. And they record all the things that happened, the accusations that were made against him. And the Quran also reiterates some of these, that it claims that this person was doing these sorts of things. None of those, amongst those claims, does it claim that this was someone actually who was lying, who was a writer who was lying that he couldn't write. So it's a claim. It was something that we expect to find.
Okay, but
we don't find.
Here's the point. They may have some conception of the story they want to tell. Okay, and I mean, I'm not saying this is what happened. I don't know, right? It's certainly conceivable, right, that they had this conception of this image that they wanted to portray, and it suited them. Right? And other things, embarrassing things, they didn't find them to be a serious problem. Otherwise, they would have cut them out. They say, we can allow this, we can't allow it. It's perfectly, that's certainly more conceivable than an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, with all the 99 properties of God, gave someone a supernatural book. So if you ask the probability of those two explanations, to me, the human one is the much more reasonable one. Because we only got 15 minutes left. So why don't we do one of these two things? The very first thing that you said was, I believe there's a creator. So why don't we, in our last 15 minutes, maybe we go 2 minutes each or something, just give me the best reason you think there is for believing that there is a creator to the universe.
Okay, that's a complicated question, but I'll do my best.
Sure. I mean, I just think we've only got 15 minutes left. Let's move.
So I believe that the universe. I mean, you're the science guy. I'm not very good at science, but evidence points towards the fact that the universe, if you go back in time, was smaller than it is now, so it's contracting back over time. And this goes to some point where we lose sort of our current understanding of physics, which is pre-Planck time.
Yes, sure.
And I believe that because we look at the universe now and it's expanding at a faster and faster rate, that it's unlikely that it's going to be a universe that collapses. So it's going to be going on for that. And if we look up now, we can see stars.
Yes. Okay.
That means that we haven't been expanding forever, because otherwise the light would come to our eyes, because it would be, the acceleration would also mean that we're at a stage where the light wouldn't come to us, so we just see a black sky.
That's not quite right.
Okay.
That's not quite right. But anyway,
that's my understanding.
Yeah. So you're giving the Olber's paradox.
Sure.
But that doesn't work in an expanding universe. So Olber's paradox doesn't work.
So because of all of these sort of things, I believe the universe has an origin.
Okay.
I believe that there was an occasion or a circumstance in which there was no universe.
Right.
So I don't believe the universe has always been there.
Right.
And I don't believe in infinite regression. You've probably come across this before. Therefore, there has to be a initiating cause, an uncaused cause. If we do a conceptual analysis of that cause, if it's something that's already existed for eternity, it can't be mechanistic, because then we would have lots of universes popping out all over the place, even overlapping with ours maybe. We don't see why that would be the case. It would be a non-mechanistic thing that would indicate some sort of choice to make a decision to cause the universe, so therefore would have a will. Right. And also then to make the universe, it would have to have at least an equal amount of power or matter or energy as the universe itself. Cause and effect, if we say is conserved, let's say conservation of energy. So a powerful thing that is not the universe, so isn't matter and energy, that has enough energy as the universe.
So the Kalam argument.
Similar to that.
Okay, all right, so let me try and address that. First off, I don't think there's any evidence the universe had a beginning at all. What there is evidence for is that there was a Big Bang. But was the Big Bang really the beginning? Well, it's certainly true that there are singularity theorems proven by Penrose and Hawking, and I've worked with Penrose and Hawking, so I know a little bit about this, that say the universe had a beginning at the Big Bang. But those theorems have assumptions. One assumption has already been shown to be false, and that was shown in 1998 with the acceleration and expansion, because those singularity theorems assume gravity is always attractive. Dark energy shows us there is repulsive gravity out there. Therefore, the assumption in the Penrose-Hawking theorem we know to be false. Okay, so straight away, what we used to think the Big Bang was the beginning, now we can't say. Also, as you kind of alluded to, our current understanding of physics breaks down at the Planck time. That's true. It doesn't follow from that the universe had a beginning. Right?
No, I'm just
people have tried to construct what are called quantum theories of gravity, and there are many attempts at this: string theory, loop quantum gravity, Java gravity. What's interesting is that all of them seem to point to a pre-Big Bang universe. The universe was contracting before it was expanding. Okay, and so that tells us we are not in a position to say the universe had a beginning. So that assumption of the argument doesn't seem to be correct.
Well, so you don't believe?
No, not according to me. According to the scientists like Roger Penrose, Stephen Hawking, and other scientists.
So you don't believe the universe had a beginning?
Correct.
You believe the universe has always existed?
No. No, I didn't say that. It might have always existed, or it might not have. We don't know.
You don't.
There's no firm evidence that it had a beginning.
All right. So you don't know. So someone to believe it had a beginning.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's their opinion. It's fine.
Yes, but it's not very compelling. What Imran said was that the science was pointing in that direction, and I'm saying the science is not pointing in that direction. The science is.
Do you believe the universe has always existed?
I don't know. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't.
All right, but if the universe has always existed, then you'd have reason to believe that, isn't it? I didn't ask what you know.
No, I believe. I don't know.
No,
may or very
I'm
might not
asking
have.
what you know.
I don't have a belief.
Well, you do.
I don't.
Well, you either accept something to be true or not.
I don't. No, but that's not the same.
It is.
Okay, it isn't. I think the universe may or may not have had a beginning.
Right,
and I don't have a belief either way. I will wait to see if strong evidence comes in favouring one statement over another, then I will believe. But right now, there isn't any firm evidence either way, because we don't have any observational evidence for anything that happens in the Planck era. Okay, so we don't know what happened, and current attempts to do quantum gravity all point to the universe existed before the Big Bang, but they don't have experimental evidence, so we don't know if they are right. But they are our best candidates at the moment. Okay, so we don't know whether the universe had a beginning. Even if it did have a beginning, causes, all our experience of causes is, causes happen before their effects. Okay, so if the universe had a beginning, there was no before, and therefore we're not in a position to demand there must be a cause. Okay, and even if there was a cause,
no, that's
you've been lots of.
All right, sorry, Imran, go on. Why don't you respond to those two points?
You've sort of made lots of.
Okay, let's go with those two. One, science doesn't really point to a beginning, and two, even if it had a beginning, we can't be confident of cause.
So what I'm hearing, and I could be misrepresenting, you just tell me if I am, is that we've got no idea about the beginning of the universe.
I would say we have lots of ideas, but no firm evidence that one of them is right. We do have quite a lot of ideas.
So you don't know.
Okay, so so really you're coming from a place of a lack of firm knowledge. These are theorems that mathematically work, but nothing actually empirical to sort of evidence.
Yes.
Okay, so that's one. So saying that we don't know, I don't think is a good argument against the understanding that actually that everything points towards some sort of beginning, some sort of start.
But what is pointing to a beginning? I don't. At least scientifically, what?
So the fact that the universe contracts to an origin point.
Well, it contracts to a very dense point.
Yeah.
But that's not an origin point necessarily. It's only an origin point if you believe a singularity theory. But as I've said, those singularity theorems, none of the people that wrote those theorems down, Penrose, Hawking, believe the assumptions of those theories anymore. They don't apply to the universe as we observe it.
They shouldn't bring up a singularity. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So atheists, just so you know, there's no singularity. Okay.
It's not that there's no singularity.
You believe it's not?
No, I don't say that. Pete, stop putting words into my mouth. I don't say there's no singularity. I'm saying the theorems that say there was a singularity are not reliable. They are good pieces of mathematics. The conclusion follows from the assumptions, but the assumptions are now no longer firm. Particularly because we found this repulsive gravity. But even if you forget that assumption, there's another assumption that we believe that general relativity describes the universe in the Planck era, and that's completely unreasonable because quantum effects are bound to take a role in the Planck era.
So do you reject general relativity as well?
I don't reject it from the most part, but I do reject it as a description of the quantum era. No one in cosmology.
They're opposing each other.
Exactly.
So you reject the theory of relativity?
No, I don't know. You're trying to put words.
Why don't you learn something here? The man is an expert. You are not. Listen to what he's saying.
Hang on. Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
You hear what you want to hear, as usual.
Stop putting words into my mouth. I don't reject general relativity. General relativity is an incredibly accurate, brilliant theory, but it is not necessarily applicable in the Planck era.
Right.
Therefore, my question to you is, I think your statement that everything's pointing to an origin point, I don't accept that.
So what I've understood is that the more that you're learning, the less that you know. That's really what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing anything more than that. And I'm saying that's an unreasonable position to be in as human beings, because we are rational and we do apply a rationale to even things that are not empirically observable. We do this all the time.
Yeah.
So for me, let's say intuitively, I think that the universe couldn't have just been around forever because of the many things that I've mentioned before. But also intuitively, it doesn't make sense to me. Okay. And when I then look at within the universe, there's another point that you mentioned that I've forgotten now that I'll probably come back to.
So there were 2 points.
Yeah.
One is science doesn't really point to the Big Bang being the beginning. I wouldn't agree that it's the more we know, the less we know. We've learned a lot. We've learned there was a Big Bang. We didn't know that, right? But what we now think is that the Big Bang was not necessarily the beginning. Okay, that conclusion is no longer the consensus view in cosmology today. Okay. So, and the other point was, even if there was a... Okay, go.
So
No, let's just deal one at a
time.
time. Let's deal with that.
What was the other point?
The other point was, even if there was a beginning, causality happens. Things that have causes that we understand have prime moments in time. We've never seen a cause that didn't have a prime moment in time. So, if there was a beginning to the universe, there wasn't a prime moment in time. So, we don't really know what causality would even look like.
We don't understand it.
Sure. So what I would say to that, it was when I used my words, I was quite specific. I said there was a circumstance in which there was no universe.
Okay,
so
sure.
I was trying to avoid time language because I understand what you mean.
But time is a property of the universe. So
Sure, of the universe.
Sure.
But there was what I was saying. There was a circumstance in which there was no universe.
Okay.
So that would mean before time and before space. And I think that, and therefore, so whatever caused that universe, the causal mechanism is beyond our understanding of causality as we know.
Okay.
But it originated the universe, and therefore we have what we have now.
Right.
Now, that's one concept. So I believe that the universe did have a beginning, even though all of these theories are sort of being put forward as muddying the waters until we have more firm understanding.
And can I ask, do you accept my point that the science isn't really pointing to a beginning? You do accept that? Okay, great.
My view on science is probably slightly different to yours.
Go ahead.
The underlying basis of science is that there are no non-natural causes. So it precludes any hypothesis or theories that go beyond nature itself. So it's sort of self-limiting in its conclusions, and that's probably, from a theistic perspective, a downfall. So with that understanding, I know why you say what you say, because that's the limiter that's been put on them. That you have to find an actual cause, and which is why we're going to go around in circles a little bit. We're not going to get to the nub of this because I'm positing a supernatural cause, and that doesn't fit into science model. So we're not going to agree. That's too big a bridge to sort of gap. The other thing that I see actually is just to what we see sort of in the universe itself, sort of the organisation. I know these are sort of, you understand this. The argument for the fact that the fine-tuning, for example, and I know that you have views on this as well.
Sure.
But actually, other things. For example, if you look at sort of the how frequently mutations occur to organisms or DNA to bring about evolution, because I don't deny evolution exists, just the mechanism is the issue. If you look at that, and we look at the time span in which there would have been evolving proteins on the universe, the diversity that we see is not explainable in the time frame that we have from my perspective. So that's one. So I think that we haven't got good explanations for the diversity of biological matter, looking at the time frame that we have for biology to have evolved so far. The other thing that we have many things that are not reducible, in my view. So consciousness, for example, it's not reducible down to any particular area of the brain, even.
No, I agree with that.
And I think these when we look at
so basically fine-tuning, evolution, consciousness,
and
and
rationality is an a priori assumption.
Okay.
I think we can't just make that a priori assumption to then do our rationality.
Okay.
We have to
so a priori rationality. Okay. Let me try and address those 4 points in the short series. I know we can do this again. This is a great chat. Okay. First off, on fine-tuning. I think fine-tuning is a very bad argument for things. I'll try and give you it's a long topic. We won't have time to go into too much detail. First off, we don't know that the universe actually is fine-tuned, because there are lots of papers actually disputing this, and we can't do an experiment where we change the constant of nature and see what will happen. We can't even predict from the constants. If I gave you the laws of nature and the constants, and I asked you to predict, does our universe have life in it? You would predict that it doesn't, because you would say the matter and the antimatter would annihilate, and we would live in a cold, dead, sterile universe. So you would get a false negative. So if we get a false negative for the one universe that we can observe, how confident should we be for the gazillion other universes that you could not observe, right? Not very confident. I'm not saying fine-tuning is wrong, I'm saying we don't really know it to be true. Okay? Okay. Second off, let's suppose it is true. Okay. So this claim is that our universe is very unlikely. Yeah. So so it could be there's plenty of good non-theistic explanations for that. One, it might be that the constants of nature are just necessary, that it couldn't be any different to what they are. Therefore, they are not improbable. Or it could be, if you come up with any improbability thing, it could just be you rolled the dice loads of times. So we could live in a multiverse or something like that. And the multiverse is actually a prediction of inflationary cosmology. It's not an ad hoc add-on to try and deal with fine-tuning. It comes out of inflationary cosmology, which is our best and consensus view of how galaxies form. So this looks like a better explanation, okay, than a being that doesn't have a mind or a brain, doesn't have a brain, a physical brain, but does have a mind, okay. Lastly, it's a bad argument in theism. There's a very good, I recommend you read this guy. His name is Hans Halvorsen. He's a professor of philosophy of physics, but he's a theist. And he's going around saying, theists, please don't use the fine-tuning argument. It's a bad argument for theists. And his argument is this. It's a good argument for deism. If you're a deist, you should use this argument. But theism makes the claim that God is the source of all things, right? And God must have fine-tuned the universe because he wants life. He wants a life-permitting universe. So he's fine-tuned the constants to give us life, okay? Why is that a bad argument for theism? Because under theism, God is the source of not just life, but the probability for life. That's down to God too. Now, why would he make the probability? If you think he's a life-loving being, he wants life in the universe, he could have made the probabilities for life to be high, but he's made them low. And the analogy that Hans Halvorsen gives is, imagine you've been kidnapped by aliens, right? And they make you play Russian roulette. And you play Russian roulette, you pull the trigger, and you survive. And your hypothesis is how was it that I survived this unlikely event is that the aliens were benevolent. They wanted you to survive, so they rigged the game to make it so that you survived. Then you look at the chamber. And what do you find? You find there were bullets in all the chambers. Does that fact alone confirm the hypothesis that the aliens were benevolent? That fact alone does not confirm that. That's disconfirmation. So for theism, fine-tuning actually turns out to be a bad argument because it's predicated on the fact that there's some probability that's outside of God's control that he has to sort of compensate with his tuning. You see what I mean? Like if you have a radio that only a tiny dial on the radio has the signal that you want, yeah, an intelligent being could fine-tune it, but only because there's all this static on the radio. Well, why is there all the static on the radio? Why don't you just make a radio where every bit gets a signal? You see what I mean? So it's a bad argument for theism, and particularly if you believe, as you said, this seems to be where the contradiction lies, that you're sort of doubting evolution can come out with a complexity. But if sorry, I thought that was your protein argument.
I'm saying that.
Sorry, then I misunderstood you.
Sure. So
okay.
You've mentioned lots of things. I haven't mentioned them because this is your time to talk. So
yeah, sure.
I won't
go for it. Go for it.
Just sort of. I'm going to try and go backwards because I'm not.
Yeah, sure. We've got to finish up soon. Yeah.
So the idea that because we're in a life-permitting universe, just to use that phrase.
Sure.
That this doesn't. And if we say that this was fine-tuned by God, means that there's lots of other universes where God was unable to fine-tune.
It's not that he was unable to. It's that he sets the probability. Maybe a different analogy. Sorry, I shouldn't. It's that, not that. Okay. Go ahead.
He sets the probability, or
sorry?
He sets the probability.
He sets the probability for life. Okay. Yeah.
So in this universe, we're making the assumption that the probability of life is low.
Yeah, that's what the fine-tuning is. Right.
Sure. But I think that there is life there, and there is no reason to assume that there's not life anywhere else in the universe, because actually the probability is that it's probably quite good that there is life elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree.
So this universe is a life-permitting universe, and we don't. Yeah. This is a big thing to say, but we don't see any evidence for other universes.
I don't agree with that.
Sure.
Okay.
Mathematically.
I think there is some evidence. It's not compelling. It's not strong enough to say yes, I believe. I don't believe, but there is some evidence, and that's the evidence for inflationary cosmology. Okay. But go ahead.
Sure. In the model there is. Is that what you're saying?
To explain, most models of inflation predict that there's a multiverse, and in fact there are certain models of inflation that have what's called a flat potential, and those models are favoured by the data, and Planck satellite can say flat potentials for inflation are favoured by the data, and those models produce a multiverse. And I think therefore there is some evidence. It's not enough to be compelling, but it is suggestive. So I say there is some evidence, but it's not enough to be sure. Yeah, I don't call myself a believer in the multiverse.
I don't know enough about physics, but as far as I know, there's no empirical evidence that there is anything.
But that is empirical evidence. You make maps of the cosmic microwave background, you then compare what properties the CMB has compared to what models of inflation, and those models of inflation that predict a multiverse are favoured by the data. That's what George Eustaphio told me. I interviewed him. He was the guy that gave the Planck data at the ESA conference. So he was the top guy on Planck. I interviewed him, and I asked him this very question: can Planck, you know what Planck is, right?
Yeah.
The Planck satellite. Yeah. I said, can Planck discriminate between inflationary models? He said yes. I said, does it favour models that are a multiverse? He says yes, absolutely. And he even said that's our most important finding.
Okay, so that's a whole other can of worms. Because then if there are multiple universes everywhere, then obviously, however these are produced in whatever mechanistic way that they are produced, because according to science it will be mechanistic.
Yeah, it's produced by inflation.
Sure. Then the fact that we haven't collided with another universe at some point already is very. If you have millions and millions of these or billions of these universes,
but they're in space that's inflating, so they're very unlikely to collide. Yeah, it's possible we could have collided in our past, and we might see a bruise or something. But there have to be, a lot of conditions for that to happen. It has to be the rate of inflation has to be such and such.
So just understand, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm learning.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You said there's billions of universes in a space outside of this universe, all inflated and yet they're not colliding. Use that as an example. And he said, why have we not collided with one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you said they're all in its space expanding. So
it's inflating. It's not just expanding. So inflation means accelerated.
Inflating within what?
Well, it's the space itself. It's not
Outside
within
of-
something. Space itself is inflating.
No, but if this universe is inflating,
Yeah. No, ours isn't.
it's not.
What we mean by inflate, well, yeah, it's undergoing a very low powered
Is that what
inflation.
universe inflating?
When we say
Expanding.
inflation, okay, let's try and define our terms.
Let's say expanding.
Let's say no, because these things have to be explained carefully. A bit. Okay, so inflation is a period of rapid expansion, where the rate of expansion is exponential, and it doubles in size in something like 10 to the minus 37 seconds.
So there's billions of these things.
Okay, now what happens is, let me try and explain it. So what we think is in the early universe there was a period of inflation.
In this universe.
Yes.
Big Bang.
Yes, but this inflation, when it decays, so there's a patch of space that's undergoing inflation.
Right.
And we do have evidence for this, okay? And when this patch decays, it heats up the space. It creates matter radiation. Okay, all the matter radiation comes from the inflating space decaying. Okay, and it decays with a half-life. Like everything radioactive decays with a half-life. So if you have a patch of radioactive substance, all right, let's just say it's a good example is a cake. It's not radioactive, but this is the example I use in a radio show. My mum makes this amazing chocolate cake. It's really, really nice. Yeah. She puts the cake down on the table, and about half the cake goes straight away. We all eat it. Okay. Then when we go back for seconds, there's no cake left. We've eaten all the cake. So that's like radioactive decay. You go from carbon-14 to carbon-12. Eventually, there's no carbon-14 left. It's all carbon-12. Okay. But in inflation, things are different. Why? Because the patch that hasn't decayed is undergoing exponential expansion. Yeah. So the amount of inflating space is always increasing. It's never going down. So it's like when I went back for the cake grew. Therefore, how many pieces of cake am I going to have? An infinite number because of the.
I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is a tricky question.
No, I know you're not. I'm trying to explain it as best as I can.
So is the universe like a balloon expanding?
A bit like the balloon. It's not exactly the same. The analogy back. There's no interior. Like a balloon has an interior.
No, forget the interior. I'm not interested in the
Yes,
interior.
it's a bit more like a cake being baked.
Let me talk about the balloon. I like the balloon.
Yeah, okay,
So the balloon's
sure.
expanding. I forget what's inside it.
Yeah.
What's it expanding into?
That we don't know is a
Right, we
short
don't know,
answer.
right.
But okay, there's a couple of levels to that answer. One is it's expanding into inflating space, if inflation is true. Okay, but it doesn't, in general relativity, it doesn't need to expand into something. Space itself has the property.
No, which is fine.
Space itself has the property that it can.
So where are these other universes?
They're in the inflating space.
They're inside the same universe?
Yes.
Really?
You could, the term universe and whatever sort of become difficult to understand. It's inside the inflating space. The inflating space is everything.
So this multiverse, okay.
Yeah,
all right. So
it's all inside.
Wow.
So this inflation is ongoing in other patches. If you think of the universe as everything that exists, our little patch.
How does that work with the singularity? Just so I understand.
Okay, so what happens is the singularity is a point in time where the space-time, curvature, density, pressure all go to infinity.
Right.
And that is inevitable, assuming certain things. And one of the assumptions is that gravity is always attractive. But in inflation, like with dark energy, gravity is repulsive. So now hang on, I'm trying to answer the question. So that would remove the Penrose-Hawking singularity. Now there's another singularity theorem called the Border-Guth-Vilenkin singularity theorem, which holds even if there is repulsive gravity. Yeah. However, what I've interviewed Alan, now a lot of theists have made a lot of noise about this theorem, proving the universe had a beginning. And I interviewed Alan Guth about it, and he said, no, it doesn't prove that.
Right.
Okay, go on.
No, because you confuse me. What's the universe according to you?
What is the universe?
Yeah.
I don't. The phrase universe can have different meanings.
What do you mean? What do you believe is this?
Well, you could define it in many ways. I mean, one way to define it is sorry.
Come this way, Phil.
Sorry. So one way to define it is the observable patch that we can see, and that's about 90 billion light years across.
So when you say that, you seem to believe the universe is.
Well, you could define it that way. You could define it that way. There's different ways of defining the word universe. And things can get confusing because people use these terms differently.
So here's what I'm trying to understand now is. According to what you're saying, the universe expanded, and if this multiverse is true, these other universes are expanding within this universe.
Yes. If you define
at the same time.
Yes.
At the same time.
Well, at the same time doesn't have a meaning in relativity, because in relativity, there is no at the same time. Time is dependent on observer. And so I actually asked Alan Guth this question. He is the inventor of this inflationary cosmology.
Didn't time begin when the universe expanded?
Not necessarily, no. Time could have. That's if the singularity is true, yes. But the singularity may not be true. In fact, most people don't think it is true. In which case, no, time didn't begin with the universe expanding.
It didn't. When did time begin?
Well, we don't know. It may have never begun. It may have always been there.
Not disrespectful. We don't really know a lot, do you?
We've learned a lot, but that opens new questions.
Every question I've heard you be asked, we don't know.
There are lots of things we know. The universe is expanding, right? We know there are other galaxies. We know there are black holes.
The universe is expanding.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It depends how you define expanding, of course.
Do you think that the universe itself is quantized?
What
is quantized then?
I think it's not inevitable, but it's likely. I think it's likely to be true. Well, I interviewed Roger Penrose. He has a theory now. He came up with the singularity theorems. They're called Penrose-Hawking theorems. And he now no longer thinks there is a singularity, and he doesn't even think that we need quantum gravity at the origin of the universe. And the reason he says that, he thinks the universe has been here forever.
Like this?
Not necessarily like this. It changes. It undergoes evolution.
Is it smaller than this?
Depends what you mean by small.
But you just wrote out the singularity.
Okay. I'm trying.
If something expanded, at what point was it?
Yeah, well, that's a confusion of language. When we say the universe is expanding, it has a very particular meaning, and it's not necessarily the meaning that you have in everyday language.
Well, go back to your original point.
Okay. Let me just answer that question about expanding. What do we mean by expanding? What we mean is the distance of distant galaxies is expanding. Okay, it doesn't mean everything is getting bigger or smaller, and the universe at the Big Bang could have been infinitely big. Right? What we mean when we say the universe is getting bigger is that our observable patch of the universe is getting bigger or smaller. But the whole universe could be infinitely big, in which case it never got bigger or smaller. It's just our patch that got bigger or smaller. Does that make sense?
Well, I was under the impression that the universe is everything. Exists.
It depends how you define the term universe. You can define it that way if you wish.
Well, I've realised now, maybe the problem I've had atheists for so long is that our definitions are different.
Yes, because you can define universe in at least three different ways.
So I'm defining everything that exists, and you're defining the universe as a patch of space we can see.
I'm not defining universe that way, but people can define it that
What are you
way.
defining it as? That's what you define.
I'm happy to go with. I don't care how you define it.
I want to know how you define it.
I can define it in different ways.
Define it in the way you believe it.
No, but I don't know. Honestly, all right. There's different ways you can define it. You could define it as the patch of space that we can see.
Is that how you define it?
No.
What do you define it?
I don't know. I don't know what the right definition is. It's a confusing word, right? Okay. I'm happy to use either definition as long as you're clear as which definition you're using. To me, that's the important thing. So in the context of what you're saying, be clear about what you mean, right? So now we know.
So you don't know what the universe is.
We do know that the universe has to be bigger than our observable
But we don't know
patch.
what we're talking about.
Now, hang on. This is one thing. You say we don't know a lot of stuff. One thing we do know is that the whole of space-time must be bigger than our observable patch, because we have made measurements of the curvature of space-time and we don't find any deviation from a flat universe. So it's either one of two things. And this must be true from the measurements that we've made. It's either infinitely big or it's finitely big but way bigger than what we can see. Okay? So that has to be
So that
true.
would rule out the definition that the universe is just the patch we can see, then, doesn't it? Surely.
You can define words however you like.
No, but you have. Look,
I don't think it really matters what word you use as long as you know what the definition
If I'm defining
means.
all of it,
Yeah.
and you're defining a piece of it, then of course it matters.
Well, if there's one...
But if I'm defining all of it, multiverse doesn't make sense. Unless there's these other universes that are outside of this universe.
If you define universe as everything that exists, then multiverse does not make sense. Agreed.
Of course it doesn't.
Agreed. But when you use the word multiverse, then the phrase universe isn't referring to that. People use these phrases interchangeably, and I agree they're lazy when they do so.
No, it doesn't work that way, because a multiverse is more than one universe.
Yes.
So if I believe the universe is everything that exists here, then according to this
But
idea
what do you mean by here? You see the confusion arises by...
I believe everything that exists as a universe.
Okay.
Everything into all the galaxies.
Okay. So all right.
So if there's more than one of those, if there's more than one of those,
when we say multiverse,
I'm saying,
what we mean? Hang on.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Sorry, Phil. So it is Phil, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, he called me Phil.
Yes. And your name is
Darren.
Darren.
Yeah. So this is how I've seen it, because when you say that if I believe the universe is all of time and space, that's the universe.
Yes.
And you're saying that a multiverse is more than one of them, then there must be another one occupying somewhere else.
Okay. When we say multiverse,
I know now. What I'm saying, this was my understanding.
Yeah.
So now,
then that's wrong.
So now going
that
back,
understanding's
so
wrong,
the way I've defined universe is not the same as your understanding universe, but you don't accept the definition of a patch of space. Yeah. Right? What we can see. You believe the universe is bigger than that, is that right?
Yes.
Do you believe the universe is infinite?
I don't know. It might be, it might not be. I don't have a firm belief. It might be, it might not be, we don't know.
Does it matter?
I don't think it matters. I don't mean either way, I don't know.
If the universe is infinite or finite?
It depends matter for what. But let me just try and clear up the issue that you raised. Okay, when we say multiverse, what I think is meant is a region of space-time from a Big Bang. And in inflationary cosmology, as it's currently understood, most models of inflation tell you that our Big Bang is not the only Big Bang, that there are many Big Bangs, and therefore they each create their own sort of what we call bubble or pocket universe.
With a bubble within a bubble?
Yes.
So
there would be an infinite number of them.
Can bubbles occur within the bubbles?
It's believed that there would be an infinite number. Yes.
And none of them collided?
Okay, so remember that they're inside an inflating space. No, we're not saying none of them collided. In fact, it's inevitable.
They're inside an inflating space.
It's inevitable. There will be collisions. The issue is whether you would see one.
Universe inside you.
Is that what you believe?
No, I don't say that.
With that patch of space.
Why can't there be inflation like me?
Because by what we mean by inside is a region of space-time that you're in. This would be a separate region of space-time. So the very phrase inside doesn't necessarily have a meaning.
Oh, wow, this is deep.
Yeah.
So what you're saying now, so this patch of space we're in, the time exists or not?
There isn't a way to time. See, in relativity, there's something called a conformal time and a Lorentzian time. That these have different meanings. There are different notions of time. So, and
what you believe in?
Well, I believe in relativity, yes.
So you
can't say there is time, but you can't necessarily say that one bubble being born is necessarily before or after, because space and time can translate into each other in relativity in non-intuitive ways. That's why I said we shouldn't use our intuition.
So this time,
because relativity is not intuitive.
So this time that exists within the patch of space that we can observe.
Yes.
You're saying outside of the patch of space we can observe.
Yeah.
There's another universe.
There may be.
That has its own time different to this time.
Yeah. Yeah. They're space-like separated.
Why do you believe that?
Well, that's even true within this universe. In this universe, there's no notion of universal simultaneity. That's true. Forget the multiverse. If multiverse turns out not to be true, it's still the case that there isn't a universal time in the universe.
Oh, there isn't?
No. The time is observer dependent. It depends how fast you're moving, depends where you are in a gravitational field. So for example, if you're on the edge of a black hole, your time stands still. If you're going at the speed of light, your time stands still. You don't have a passage
So this
of time.
idea that the universe is 14.5 billion years old,
13.8.
Yeah, you're saying this is
That's
wrong.
for us. We measure it as 13.8
Do you believe
billion
that's
years
true?
old. Yes. When we say universe old, that's how much time has happened since the Big Bang. But it's not wrong to assume that the Big Bang was necessarily the beginning. So when we say the universe is 13.8 billion years old, that's what we mean. It's how much time has elapsed since the Big Bang. And we define the Big Bang as an evolution from a hot, dense state. And when did the hot, dense state come about? When inflation ended. So actually inflation happens before the Big Bang, not afterwards.
So you believe time existed before the Big Bang?
It may have done so, yes.
That's good to hear.
Yes.
Do you hear that, atheists?
Yes, there are a lot of atheists that make completely wrong statements.
That does allow causality before the Big Bang?
It does, yes.
Oh, brilliant.
It does. It's certainly possible. The universe has always existed. Certainly, and many cosmologists. What I do is I've interviewed all the top, well, not all, many of the leading cosmologists in the field. We've just done a film with Stephen Hawking. We've worked with Roger Penrose. We've worked with Alan Guth, who invented inflationary cosmology.
You told Stephen Hawking he's wrong?
No.
You said he was wrong?
No.
You did.
What did I say?
You said Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking admit that they're wrong about singularities.
No. Well, okay. Hawking himself
admits the singularity is not true now.
He's been saying that for about 30 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He doesn't believe in singularity, Stephen Hawking.
Correct. And it's his theorem. They're called Penrose-Hawking theorems. I just made a film with him about what he thinks replaces the singularity. If you go on YouTube, search Skydive Film.
Skydive Film, is that you?
That's me. And we have a film series called Before the Big Bang. We've made 5 of these films so far, and there's more on the way.
You don't say I don't know a lot, do you?
In the films, I don't say we don't know a lot. There are some times we do say that.
It's a fair point, because I've heard everything about you, Phil. I've heard Phil's the man. Phil's the man who studied cosmology, and it's fantastic.
I'm not an expert in cosmology. I've interviewed
And I'll be honest with you, I've not spoken to an atheist who says don't know just as much as you. I really don't.
Okay.
Whereas I was expecting the answers.
I'm sorry, we don't have.
No, but here's the thing. You see, I'm not asking. Again, most of my questions have not been what you know. It's what you believe in.
Well, there are statements. Yeah, I know, but there are statements where I just don't have a firm belief. Like you asked me, is the universe infinitely big or finite? I don't have a firm belief because
But you also stated it doesn't matter whether it's finite or infinite.
Depends what you mean by does it matter.
Would it change anything?
Probably not.
Really?
Well, it might change something. It does change some things. Like one of the difficulties in an infinite universe is calculating probabilities. In an infinite universe, everything that's possible is guaranteed to happen.
And a finite universe, does it require a cause?
I don't think necessarily. No.
Really?
Because to me, this is where we were having a conversation. To me, when I look at causes, I see that they're things that happen in time.
Yeah, you said time existed.
Yes, but if the universe is, well, it depends what you mean by finite. Do you mean finite in space or finite in time?
Finite in time.
Okay, if it's finite in time, then there isn't a moment before the Big Bang.
So do you believe the universe is finite in time or not?
I don't have a belief there. It might be, it might not be.
If it is finite in time, because you don't know,
correct.
So possibility it's finite in time.
It's possible. It's certainly possible. I certainly don't say it couldn't be.
If it's finite in time, does it require a cause?
I don't see that it does, because to me, causality, from what we understand of causality, causes happen before effects. So if there was a first moment of time, right, then the notion of causality seems to be problematic one, shall we say, because there wasn't a before for the cause to happen in.
So then your response really should be the universe can't be finite in time because causality can't occur.
No, I wouldn't say it can't be finite in time, but if it was finite in time, then I don't say that it must have had some prior cause, because the notion of prior
so you're then saying
doesn't have a meaning if it has a beginning.
So what you're saying is that if the universe is finite in time, then it began to exist by itself.
No, not necessarily, because the notion of finite in time and began to exist may seem on the face of it to be the same. But actually, it depends what you mean by begin to exist.
Okay.
So if there's a state, what you said was there was a state where there was no universe. And that could be the case, and then there's a universe. But it could also be the case there's never a state where there's no universe, there's just a finite number of past events. So there's never a moment where there's no universe.
Okay.
So you have this notion that
if there's a finite number of events, that means we have a beginning, isn't it?
It is a beginning, but it's not necessarily a moment. There's no moments where the universe doesn't exist.
No, but the point
does that make sense?
If something is
it's hard to get your head around.
If something is finite in time, it means it had a beginning, isn't it?
Yes.
And if something has a beginning,
doesn't
it require a cause?
No, because all the causes that we know have. If I asked you what caused World War II, right, you would say Nazis invaded Poland. And I said, well, why did the Nazis invade Poland? Because they were angry.
Judea declared war on Germany. Carry on.
Is there some
Let's not go there, okay? Let's not go there.
So, do you know anything that come to exist?
But you are correct. All right. What's
in this world? Is there anything that come to exist?
Depends what you mean by cause. Maybe. I'm not sure. Maybe. Okay. So when you have a
is everything that begins to exist contingent on something else?
When we see things begin to exist, their cause is the thing that haven't preceded them.
So they really they require that.
Well, not necessarily. It depends on your. Quantum mechanics at least opens a possibility.
I said contingent.
Okay, let me try and answer as best I can. Certainly, quantum mechanics raises the possibility of things not having causes.
How does it do that?
It would take longer than I have to explain it.
I understand. I understand my walks of it.
Okay. In quantum event, so if you have a radioactive decay of a particle, you can predict using quantum mechanics precisely.
You have a radioactive decay. What causes the decay?
Well, that's a good question. If they're unstable, basically.
No, right. So what makes it unstable?
Well, the atomic structure makes it unstable.
What about the atomic structure makes it unstable?
Okay, I know where you're going with this. You want to go back and back and back.
No, what I'm going to do is very, very simple. Decay is an effect. So it requires
hang on. Let's choose a different example. Okay, fine. When you look in the mirror, right? Look in a plane of glass, and you see your reflection in the glass, right? Some photons are going through that glass and some are bouncing off it, but their photons are both doing the same. So you can ask the question: what causes?
Say that again, sorry.
When you look at
I look at a pane of glass.
Pane of glass, and you see a reflection in the glass, right? Some photons are going through the glass.
Some photons.
Yes.
Photons from where?
From wherever the light source is.
Right.
Sun, for example. Right. Sun, wherever the light source is. Those lights.
Some photons are going through the glass.
Okay. So some are reflecting back on you.
What's causing the photons?
Now that's. What's causing them? That's not issue. Is not what causing the photons. The issue is what causes one photon to go through the glass and one not to. And as far as we can tell in quantum mechanics, there is no cause for that.
But there's cause for photons.
Yes, but there isn't a cause for why some go through and some don't.
No, there's not a reason why.
Or even. I mean, to be honest, we don't have time to go into the depths of quantum
but
theory.
every example you've used required a cause.
Okay.
Photons required the sun.
But which one's going through or which one's didn't?
That's different. That's the reason why they're going through and why they're not.
No. It's okay.
What's allowing some to go through and what's
there
preventing
are events in quantum mechanics which may not have causes. There are different interpretations, so we don't know for sure.
Because we don't understand.
Exactly, we don't understand.
It's not as simple as we just don't understand it. There are reasons to think there are not causes.
Name something that in quantum mechanics that you can prove doesn't have a cause.
I can't say it. I'm not going to say proves doesn't have a cause, because as I told
So it could have a cause.
As I told you, there are different interpretations in quantum mechanics, and some of them are causal and some aren't.
Can you name anything that you believe in quantum mechanics isn't caused by anything?
I'm not going to say that because I don't know what is the right interpretation of quantum mechanics, but it's certainly conceivable and it's certainly reasonable to look at quantum mechanics. And so, for example, Alex Valenkin is a cosmologist quoted by theists all the time because he said that he had a proof that the universe had from the beginning, and he says quantum mechanics does not have causes. When a radioactive particle decay is not a causal event. Okay, that when a radioactive particle decays or not decays,
it's not a cause.
He says that's an
So I asked him the same question: what caused the decay?
No, but you're using a different context, because what we say, the uncaused moment, is not the decay itself; it's which particle decays and which doesn't. Because only half of them decay, and the other half don't.
That was why.
And they're all the same. They're all the same.
No, there's something changing.
Right?
There's something there, isn't there? I just don't know what it is.
No, of course. Okay. Look, we're not going to go into all the details of quantum mechanics. We don't have time. All I would say is, all I want to say is, read up about it, and the notion that causality breaks down in quantum the notion that causality breaks down in quantum mechanics is I think a reasonable one. I'm not saying it's definitely right, so I'm not going to prove things don't have causes, because I don't necessarily believe that. All I'm saying is it's a reasonable thing to suggest, and it's not something that's fringe or not mainstream physics.
I get you.
Go ahead.
If I could just ask, just something is slightly. When you're talking about the photons, some of them go through and some of them bounce back.
Yes.
So far, in your understanding and according to the latest scientific theories, what are the reasons for this? Do you have
It's
any
random. There is no reason.
These random. So there's no causes.
So it appears random
to them.
No, it's not just that there appears random. You can do statistical tests on things for randomness, and they pass statistical tests for randomness.
Right.
Okay?
That's how you've just deemed them to be random.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's after 7, eh?
Oh fuck! I need to get going, guys. Listen, we've had a very interesting chat. Maybe we can do it again.